What's the meaning of doubtful debt? Doubtful debt, right? Doubtful debt means lamai ready for future losses, ready for future bad debt, simply, right? Ready for future bad debt. Therefore, ready for future bad debt. Therefore, I'll tell you the first scenario, right? First scenario, and I'll tell you the examples, right? So please write down scenario number one. Scenario number one. I'll zoom out. Here, scenario number one. Please keep space to write down the topic. Topic එක ලියන්න ඉඩ තියාගන්න. මම අන්තිමට කියන topic එක මෙතන. Right? I'll tell you the topic later. So write down scenario number one and write down the question. Following balances were as at 23 31st March, right? 23 31st March. Following balance. There's only like data balance, right? Data balance. Data balance. Let's assume 500,000. 500. Additional informations. Additional information. Identify 10% provision for doubtful debt. Provision for doubtful debt. Understand? Identify 10% provision for doubtful debt. Normally, now how to calculate provision for doubtful debt? Provision for doubtful debt should be calculated on my closing debtor balance. First of all, calculate, then these things you have learned in account equation, right? Already known. I'm not going to explain what's the meaning of doubtful and other things, right? Already learned. Therefore, I'll tell you how to calculate this one, right? Therefore, provision for doubtful debt should be calculated closing debtor balance. Closing debtor balance into percentage, 10%. Provision for doubtful debt, how much? Sorry, 500. 10% means how much? 50,000. 50,000. Right, calculate. 15, very easy. But here, then are there any balances in opening or any balance? Is there any balances, opening balances? Provision for doubtful debt, is there balance? No any balances, right? Therefore, first of all, we have to, this is we call initial recognition, right? Initial provision is provide, right? There's no any opening balances and closing balances. Therefore, first of all, we calculate provision for doubtful debt, right? We call that one initial provision, right? Initial provision. Right? Then what is the double end for provision for doubtful debt? Normally, right? Provision for doubtful debt should be the doubtful debt also expense. And expense, what's the double entry? Expense, doubtful debt expense debit, right? Expense debit 50, provision for doubtful debt, right? Provision for doubtful debt credit 50, right? Provision for doubtful debt credit 50. No, that's a double entry, right? Then in double entry lesson you have learned this one, right? Please record in two accounts now, two ledger accounts. Doubtful debt expense, doubtful debt expense, this is provision. Provision for doubtful debt, right? Please record in two accounts. Now there's no any opening balances. Calculate the value and just record me. Doubtful debt expense debit, provision for doubtful debt expense, provision for doubtful debt credit, doubtful debt, here provision for doubtful debt. Understand? Debit, credit. Understood? Very easy. Right. Then, right now, if you have any doubt, so why we have to credit it to provision for doubtful debt? Right? I'll explain that now, right? So now, have we learned account equation? That equation how to record under account equation. Asset plus expenses equals liability plus equity plus income. Right? Can you record this transaction under this accounting equation? First of this is that the double entry theory equation, asset and expenses increase debit, right? Liability, equity and income increases credit, double entry lesson. How to record under this accounting equation, this doubtful debt, how to calculate it? Can you tell me how to record under this accounting equation? Can you tell me how to record? How to record? Then doubtful debt expense me. Doubtful debt expense increase 50. Doubtful debt. Understand? Doubtful debt. But deduct them from what? Debtor asset debtor asset decrease 50. Please write down. Debtor decrease 50. Right? Doubtful debt expense increase 50. That's the way of recording under accounting equation. Then you have learned this one, accounting equation lesson. Understand? Doubtful debt. Therefore, how to create double entries here? Doubtful debt debit, then expenses increase debit to credit. Doubtful debt expenses increase debit. Therefore, we have to record here like this. Doubtful debt debit 50. Debtor asset decrease what? Debtor asset decrease creditor. Debtor asset decrease creditor. Debtor credit 50. Right? According to the accounting equations, dual impact, right? Doubtful debt expense increase, debtor asset decrease. Therefore, we have to create double increase like this. Doubtful expense debit, debtor asset credit. Understand? Right? According to the dual impact. Right? But lamai, you can't under accounting equation, you have to deduct it from debtor asset. Understood? You have to deduct it from debtor asset. But when going to create double entries, when going to create double entries, අපි මෙහෙම දාන්නේ අපි debtor නේ මෙතන ඉන්නේ. මෙහෙම debtor ඉන්නවා නම් debtor ගේ balance එකක් තියෙනවානේ දැන් 300. ඔහොම. There's debtor balance 300. But we are not going to credit into ළමයි debtor account. Debtor account එකට දාන්නේ මේ 50 එක. අපි මෙයාගේ දාන්නේ ළමයි brother account එකකට. මොකද ඔක්කොම ටික අඳුන ගන්න බෑනේ. මෙයාගේ brother account එකක් හදනවා. twins account වගේ නිකන් brother account. brother කියලා දානවා මේ. අපි ඒ account එකට කියන provision. Right? Provision for doubtful debt. Understood? Provision for doubtful debt. That brother account of debtor. මොකද මෙතන දැම්මහම bad debt, return inward, discounts allowed, cash receipts ඔක්කොම තියෙනවා. ඒ හින්දා ඒක අපිට හොයාගන්න අමාරුයිනේ. ඒ හින්දා අපි කරන්නේ මේක මෙතනට දාන්න නැතුව ඒකට තමයි වෙන්න මේ provision for doubtful කියලා දාන්නේ. debtorම තමයි debtor account මයි. හැබැයි අපි දාන්නේ මොකද්ද? Provision for doubtful debt. Understand? That brother account of what? Brother account of debtor account. එතකොට මේකත් මොකක්ද? asset account. And then debtor also asset. The brother provision for doubtful also තමයි asset account. Asset, but balance තමයි comes from credit side. Credit balance එකක් තියෙන්නේ abnormal balance, right? Abnormal balance, provision for doubtful debt, credit balance. Understood now? right? Please write down that instead of crediting to debtor account, we can credit to brother account called provision for doubtful. That one also has it, but abnormal balance. Balance comes from credit side. Understand? Please write down that one as well. Right, this is double entry lesson actually. Yeah? I told this one double entry lesson. Right. Now this is the way of recording in T accounts. Let's look at how to record under financial extractions. Here on under financial extractions. So I'll tell you EPF and ETF how to record an account equation later, end of the session. So let's look at this one now. Right, finish. Now how to record on ledger accounts. Ledger account, sorry, financial extractions. So I'll erase this one. Please draw. Then doubtful debt lamai where we have to record. Please take income statement and SOFP. Current asset. And here, then where we have to record administration expenses, so finance, so other admin. What? Distribution. What? Doubtful debt where we have to record. Distribution expense lamai. Why? Because distribution expenses means sales related expenses. Understood? Sales related expenses. Now how this is related to sales? I lamai debtor ni calculated on debtors. Debtor related to credit sales. Credit sales, debtors, doubtful debt calculated on debtors. Therefore, finally, indirectly related to credit sales, doubtful debt. Understood? Therefore, doubtful debt expense recorded under distribution. Therefore, first of all, write down the debtor balance here. Debtor balance how much? 500. Therefore, my provision for doubtful debt also that brother account of debtor, brother account of debtor. Therefore, here you have to deduct the provision for doubtful debt balance. Doubtful debt. Wait. Then how to record? Look at the how to adjust according to double entry theory. What's a double entry? Doubtful debt expense debit. Debit entry you have to record it under distribution expense. Doubtful debt. Doubtful debt debit 50 on the debit entry. Understand? Debit. Provision for doubtful debt credit. Credit entry you have to record it here and deduct it. Understood? This is the credit entry. Understand? Debit entry distribution expense entries වලින් කරන්න ඕනේ. කටපාඩම් කරලා කරන්න එපා මේක. කරන්න මේ හරිම ලේසි තැනක් තියෙනවා. So only 3 scenarios. ඔයා කටපාඩම් කරලා කරොත් වරදිනවා සමහර දැන්. හරි. එහෙනම් මෙහෙම කරන්න. double debit entry මෙතන දැම්මා, credit entry මෙතන දාලා ඒක අඩු කරලා ගන්නවා net value එක separate. 450. Understand? 450. Clear? Right? This is the first scenario. Right? There's only two scenarios. Tute එකේ තියෙන ගණන් ටික අපි homework විදිහට කරමු. මම ඒක next Thursday කරන්නම් class එකේ. දැනට අපි theoretic කරලා ඉවර කරමු. scenarios දෙක කරලා ඉවර කරමු. Tute එක ටික මම ගණන් හදනවා class එකේ. හරි? Okay, finish. Understood? Shall we move to the next scenario number 2? May here write down lamai scenario number 1, initial provision. Initial provision. ඒ කියන්නේ provision එකේ balance එකක් මුකුත් නෑ අපි ඉස්සරලාම තමයි කැල් කරන්නේ. තේරෙනවද? ඒකට අපි කියන initial provision. කියන්නේ ready for future losses. Ready for future bad debts. කලින් අඳුනගෙන අපි කැල් කරලා දා ගන්න වෙනම මේ වෙනම දාලා net value එක පෙන්නනවා මෙතන. bad debt වෙන්න තියෙනවා. වෙයි කියලා හිතලා ගන්න. Okay no? Right. Please write down scenario number 2, but I'll tell you the topic after the explanation. right මම අන්තිමට කියන්න topic එක මොකක්ද කියන එක ඉස්සෙල්ලා අපි හදලා topic එක දාගමු හරිද 2 then write down again following balances was extracted 31st 23 right debtor debit this is trial balance 500 credit balance and there's my balance provision for doubtful debt but at 22 April 1st balance lamai 30,000 then additional information right identify 10% provision for doubtful debt provision for doubtful debt right clear there's my balance there's opening balance understand please tell me debtor balance lamai given closing balance please write down then here not mention the date that 23 31st March this means definitely this is what closing balance closing balance but please tell me this is provision for doubtful debt given lamai 22 April 1st 22 April 1st means opening balance or closing balance what do you think දැන් trial balance එකේ දෙන්නේ closing balance හැබැයි මේකට provision for doubtful debt එක විතර විතරක් දීලා තියෙනවා balance එක මෙහෙම which is what opening balance නෝ ළමයි අන්න write down here this is ළමයි opening balance write down අන්න එහෙම තමයි දෙන්නේ හරිද opening balance clear opening balance now this is a very important part very easy get the clear meaning then උතනින් ආවේ scenario ටිකෙන් එහාට එන්නේ අනිවාර්යෙන් එන්නේ හරි ආවොත් කියන්නෝ මට බලන්න එහෙම එන්න විදිහක් නැහැ හරි මේක තමයි එන ඔක්කොම ටික right scenario number 2 but now calculate the doubtful debt please calculate the doubtful debt provision for doubtful debt calculate 10% how much closing debtor balance into 10% how much closing debtor balance 500 10% killing only 50 no 50 right 50,000 very easy but then previous scenario there was not any opening balances therefore we record the total amount but lamai here you can't record total amounts because there's opening balance right මේක මෙහෙමයි කරන්නේ හරිද දැන් අපි හිතුව මෙහෙම there are two boxes let's assume there are two boxes this is lamai doubtful debt expense right this is doubtful debt expense box එකක් කියලා ගන්නවා T account එක like box මේක අපි හිතමු doubtful debt provision for doubtful debt provision for doubt this is the provision for doubtful debt account like box for doubtful debt හරිද දැන් කලින් එකේ ළමයි scenario number 1 we recorded total amount but there wasn't no any opening balances ඔක්කොම ටික දාගත්තා හැබැයි මෙතන there's ළමයි යන opening balance නේ provision accounts there's an opening balance credit me already ළමයි මේ in provision box එකේ මම දාන්න there's 30,000 opening balance 30,000 credit balance which is opening balance no opening balance හැබැයි මේ කැල් කරලා එන්නේ ළමයි මේ අපි හැම වෙලාවෙම කැල් කරන්නේ මේක තමයි එන්න ඕන closing balance එක right this should be the closing balance දැන් කලින් එකේ මුකුත් තිබ්බේ නැහැ නේ එහෙනම් මේකම දාගත්තා 50 ම දැම්ම debit credit කරගත්තා මේ මෙතන එහෙම දාන්න බෑ ඔයා හිතන්නකෝ නිකන් මෙහෙම like let's assume this is like water tank there's then in the morning there's 30 liters but when comes to evening there should be 50 liters පටන් ගද්දි 30 liters තියෙනවා පටන් ගද්දි හැබැයි ඔයාගේ අම්මා කියනවා කියලා හිතන්නකෝ හවස් වෙද්දි 50 liters තියෙන්න ඕනේ එහෙනම් මෙහෙමනේ. ඔයා කැල්ක් කරපු එක තමයි මෙතන තියෙන්න ඕනේ. 50 liters. credit balance එක තියෙන්න ඕනේ. මේ calculated one. right calculated. හැබැයි තියෙන්නේ මේක. එහෙනම් මට කියන්න how much මදිද වැඩිද? under or over? Under values or over values in provision account for provision box තියෙනවා මදිද වැඩිද කියන්න බලන්න. මදි නේද? මදි නේද? මදි. එහෙනම් මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? should we include or remove? what we have to do? කොච්චර මදිද කියන්නේ how much the under value? මේ calc කරපු එකත් එක්ක ඒක දාන්නේ නැහැ. දැන් ඔයා හිතන්න 50 ම දැම්මොත් මේක 80 වෙනවා. right? If there's 30 balance, if you put here 50,000 again, it will have 80. But should be make calculated value should be the closing value, but there's open 30. How much should be the remaining balance? 20 නේද? මදි ගාන 20. අන්න ඒක තමයි adjust කරන්නේ. ඔයාගේ අම්මා කියනවා 30,000 liters තියෙන උදේ ටැංක් එකේ. ඔයාට කියනවා මේක හවස් වෙද්දි 50,000 කරලා තියන්න කියලා කියනවා. ඔයා මොකද කරන්නේ? මදි ටික පුරවන්න නෙදෙන්නේ. You have to fill. Pre-fill. Therefore you have to put how much? 20,000. 20. And that should be the lamai adjusted value. That's the adjustment value. ඔයා මේකම ගන්න බෑ. මේ පළවෙනි සිනාරියෝ ගත්ත පළවෙනි එක මුකුත් තිබ්බේ නෑනේ. ඔක්කොම ටික දාගත්තා. ඒතකොට 0 තියෙන. total 50 දැම්ම ක්‍රෙඩිට් කරා. ඒතකොට ටික දැම්ම මෙතන. එහෙනම් මේක තමයි කරන්න ඕනේ මොකද්ද? That's the adjustment. Therefore please tell me credit balance එකකට තව 20 එකක් දාන්න නම් මොකද කරන්නේ? credit or debit? Right? You have to increase this credit 30 into credit 50. Therefore this 20,000 should be credited or debited. Right? Credit balance to increase to credit 50, that adjustment value should be credited or debited. මේ credit 50 එකක් තියෙන එකට 30 එකක් තියෙන එකට මේක credit 50 කරන්න මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? ඒ adjustment value එකත් මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? Should be credited, no? Should be credited. මේ this is the adjustment value. Adjust. Understand? Adjust, which means credited. Credit balance එකට ඒක credit 50 කරන්න credit money කරන්න ඕනේ. Credit. Understand? Therefore, what's the double entry? First of all, please write down this one, this box. Then please write down two T accounts like this. Doubtful debt. Here, provision for doubtful debt. There's no opening balance. Right. Now what's the adjustment? Closing balance should be right that calculated value. 50,000. එහෙනම් 50,000 මේකනේ එන්න ඕනේ. එහෙනම් මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? අර මදි value එක දානවා මේ credit. That should be debited here. Provision for doubtful debt. Here doubtful debt. That's the adjustment. Credit. Here debit line. Understood? And finally that calculated value will be comes here. Understand? Balance carried down, balance brought forward. This is the calculated one. Understand? Calculated one. Therefore, what is the double entry? Any student can tell me how much should be the double entry? Sorry, what should be the double entry? Doubtful debt debit, no? Doubtful debt expense debit 20,000. Provision for doubtful debt credit 20,000. Understood? මට කියන්න හරිද තේරුණාද? දැන් මේක මෙහෙමයි හරි. මේක අපි ledger accounts ඇතුලේ දාන්න ලේසියිනේ අපිට දැන් එකපාරට. හැබැයි මේක financial statement through adjust කරන එක තමයි තියෙන්නේ. ඒක පාඩම් කරන්න නැතුව double entries වලින් යන්න. හරි. මම පාඩම් කරන්න නැති වෙන තමයි කියලා දෙන්නේ. හරි. Please tell me understood. Therefore what is this ළමයි? මට කියන්නේ මොකක්ද එහෙනම් topic එක? Under provided here under provision no over provision. වැඩිින්ද තිබ්බේ මේ box එකේ අඩු වෙන්න තිබ්බේ. අඩු වෙන්නේ තිබ්බේ. එහෙනම් මොකද්ද topic එක එන්න ඕනේ? Under provision. Write down scenario number 2, under provision. Under provision. Understand? Under provision. Clear? හරිද තේරුණාද මේ ඇඳ ගන්න අනිවාර්යයෙන් මේ විදිහට ගන්න ඔයාලා under provision over provision එක මෙහෙම පොඩි box එකක් දාලා බලන්න තියෙන මේ ගාන එන්න ඕනේ 50 එහෙනම් මදිනේ ඒක තමයි adjust කරන්නේ කලින් එකේ තිබ්බේ නෑ පළවෙනි සිනාරියෝ එකේ මුකුත් නෑ ඔක්කොම ටික දැම්ම 15ම දැම්ම 15 දාගත්ත doubtful debt right clear please write down this one T accounts then let's see how to adjust to financial statement right right now lamai what's the double entry තියෙන්නේ දැන් double entry එක හදා ගන්න ඕනවා ඒක තමයි first scene එක හරි හිතුවා තියෙන 20 therefore adjustment should be 20 doubtful debt debit 20 provision for doubtful credit 20 but දැන් මේක T accounts ගහලා හදන්න බෑනේ අපි හදන්න ඕනේ through the ledger accounts sorry financial statement please prepare income statement here මාත් එක්කම කරන්න income statement small income statement and distribution expense distribution and let me here SOS right here current asset මුකුත් දාන්න එපා values දාන්න එපා මෙහෙම බලා ගන්න මේ data value how much data value 500 recorded here කොහොමද දාගන්න ඒතර provision එකක් දාගන්න මේ provision for doubtful debt provision for doubtful but lamai please record here provision for doubtful debt opening balance මේ plus කියලා දාගන්න 30 this is lamai opening balance that opening credit balance එහෙම ලියාගන්න opening credit balance මම in detail හිමීට කියලා දෙන්න වයිටස් මේක ප්‍රැක්ටිස් කරලා ඕන ගානක් හදන්න පුළුවන් හරි මා උතනින් එහාට එන්නේ නැහැ ඉතින් එන්නේ නැති ටික ගණන් 100ක් හදනකොට එන ටික දුන්නාම ලේසිනේ ස්ටඩි කරන්න වෙන දේ පාඩම් කරන්න එපා ප්‍රැක්ටිස් කරන්න ඊට පස්සේ කොහොමද this is opening balance credit balance 30000 right right now what's the adjustment me provision doubtful debt expense debit on recorded distribution expense doubtful debt debit how much 20,000 on a debit entry this is debit entry credit entry what provision for doubtful debt ඒ කියන්නේ ළමයි අර තියෙන credit 30000 balance right again added නෙමෙයි තියෙන 30000 එක add කරනවා වගේ වැඩක් නෙමෙයි එහෙනම් කිලෝ මොකද කරන්නේ මේකට දාගන්න මේ plus කියලා දාගන්න මේ that's the credit balance understand therefore with the opening 30 and adjustment 20 how much the total 50,000 understood therefore value how much 450 මේ මේක තමයි අර calculator එකේ එන්න ඕනේ හරි calculated value please write down scenario number 3 please keep space and write down the topic here write down following balances extracted from 23-31st March data balance 500 write down provision for doubtful debt opening balance write down 73,000 there's my provision for doubtful debt 73,000 understood provision for doubtful debt there's opening balance 73,000 right then write down additional information identify provision for doubtful debt 10% right calculate the provision for doubtful debt 10% data balance 500 here 10% means how much 50,000 that's the calculated one again same right 15 but now provision for doubtful debt, how much? Right, again, right, write down opening balance 73. Right, now I'll again draw that two boxes. This is doubtful debt expense. Expense. This is like a provision for doubtful debt. Provision for doubtful debt. Right. Right. But Lamai now calculated 150,000. But how much the opening balance? Already there's Lamai 73,000. Me there's Lamai 73,000 credit balance. Credit opening balance. Understand? But end of the day, right? Then වගේ අම්ම කියනවා 73 liters තියෙනවා වගේ ටැංක් එකේ. හැබැයි හවස් වෙද්දි මේක how much? 53,000 50,000 closing වෙන්න ඕනේ 53. තියෙන්න ඕනේ ළමයි 53. එහෙනම් තියෙන්න ඕනේ මේ ගානනේ. දැන් කලින් තිබේ වැඩි එක. දැන් තියෙන්න ඕනේ මේ ගාන. right? Close. Therefore please tell me now. මට කියන්න opening balance 73 but calculated closing balance should be how much? 50,000. මට කියන්න overvalued or undervalued? වැඩිද අඩුයිද? ටැංක් එකේ තියෙන ලීටර්ස් ගාන වැඩිද අඩුයිද දන්නේ නැහැ. වැඩිනේ. කොච්චරක් වැඩිද මේ? Therefore you have to remove excess value, you have to overvalue, you have to remove here. Understand? Overvalue amount you have to deduct it. Therefore how much should be deducted? කොච්චරක් ඔයා අයින් කරන්න ඕනේ? remove කරන්න ඕනේ. You have to remove that one excess amount. How much? You have to remove that one. Me remove. Therefore how much we have to remove? 23,000 no 23 and that should be the adjustment value ළමයි. ඒක තමයි adjust කරන්න ඕනේ මේ adjusted. Understand? That should be the adjusted value. Clear? එහෙනම් ළමයි මෙහෙමයි වෙන්නේ. Right? දැන් මට කියන්නේ මේ මෙතන ඇඳ ගන්න provision for doubtful debt account. Write down here provision for doubtful debt. Record the value opening balance 73 and please record here doubtful debt expense. Therefore ළමයි excess over provision over value වැඩිපුර දාලා තියෙන provision එක. එහෙනම් ළමයි to remove excess value, that overstated value, to credit balance, from credit balance if we want to remove some amounts, what we have to do? Debited or credited? Credit 73 වලින් ඔයා 50 credit 70 50 කරගන්න නම් කීයක් දාන්න ඕනද? කීය මොකද්ද කරන්න ඕනේ? Debit or credited? To remove that one, debited no. To remove that one, you have to debited ළමයි. Therefore, how much the value you have to debited? 23 and 23. Understood? Therefore, you can get that calculated 50,000 value closing balance. Me calculated value. Understood? Calculated. Understand? Therefore මෙහෙමයි වෙන්නේ. දැන් ළමයි මෙතන ඩෙබිට් කරා නම් එහෙනම් මෙතන ඩෙබිට් කරා නම් doubtful debt expense account එකට ඩෙබිට් කරන්න පුළුවන්. Can you debit again doubtful debt? Doubtful debt debit provision also එහෙම දාන්න බෑනේ. If here debited ළමයි therefore මේ මෙතනිනුත් අයින් කරනවා. මේක ගැන හිතන්නේම ලොකුවට. මම මේක අයින් කරන්න. provision එකෙන් හිතන්න. එහෙනම් මෙතන මොකද කරන්න ඕනේ? Here ළමයි you have to credit it. Doubtful debt you have to credit it because ළමයි that excess amount removed and you have to credit it here. Understand? Me credited ඔයා මෙතනින් තමයි හිතන්න ඕනේ. provision එකෙන් අයින් කරනවා වැඩි ටික over provision. එතනින් අයින් කරා. එහෙනම් මෙතන credit. Doubtful debt expense credited. Please write down the double entry here. What's the double entry? Then final one, last one. Provision for doubtful debt debit. Debit 23. Me deducted. Deducted නෙමෙයි. deduct debit කරන එක අඩු කර doubtful debt expense credit ළඟ credit 23 ඒ දැන් expenses ළමයි credited loss ළමයි decrease නේ expense credit කරනවා කියන්නේ expense එක තමයි අඩු වෙන්නේ තේරෙනවද ඕක other income එකක් වෙන්නේ නැහැ වැරදිද first of all write down here write down over provision clear over provision understand වැඩිපුර තියෙනවනම් double end එක අනිත් පැත්තට එන්න provision for doubtful debt debit provision එකෙන් අයින් කරනවා doubtful debt expenses credited understood right please tell me any questions right provision එකේ තියෙන ටිකෙන් අයින් කරනවා කල්පනා කරන්න ඊට පස්සේ ඔයාලට short method කරන්න පුළුවන් ඉතින් වෙන දේ තේරුම් ගත්තා නම් හරි provision එකෙන් අයින් කරා doubtful debt expense එකෙන් credit කරා එහෙනම් ඔයා මෙතන doubtful debt expense credit කරනවා කියලා මම මෙතනින් හිතන්න provision එකෙන් අයින් කරා එහෙනම් මෙතන credit අන්න එහෙම හිතන්න okay okay let's do how to record through financial statement right please draw the financial statement මේක දැන් distribution වල තියෙනවානේ ළමයි promotion expenses ඔහොම තියෙනවානේ promotions අපි තමයි තියනවා කියලා promotion bad debt ඔහොම තියනවා කියලා හිතන්නකෝ එතකොට මෙහෙමයි වෙන්නේ then debtor balance how much 500 debtor balance 500 record the opening provision for doubtful debt opening balance how much 74,000 මෙහෙම දාගන්න 74 කියලා 74 නේ opening credit balance right opening credit 73 ද yeah 73 73 how to adjust it now how to adjust කොහොමද දාන්නේ මේ double entry මේ provision for doubtful debt debit therefore you have to deduct it මේ 23 deducted that's the debit entry provision මේ doubtful debt expense credited නේ ඒ කියන්නේ ඔයා doubtful debt expense එක මෙහෙම දාලා ඒක තමයි expense එක අඩු කරලා තමයි පෙන්නන්න ඕනේ ඒ කියන්නේ total expenses වලින් deduct වෙනවා මේ අර bad debt ඒ වගේ තියෙනවනේ ඔයා මේ deducted from ඒක other income එකක් කියලා දාන්නේ නෑ deducted from distribution expense අර distribution expenses ටික වලින් තමයි අඩු වෙන්නේ තේරෙනවද distribution expenses වලින් අඩු කරලා පෙන්නන්න understand debit credit එතකොට බලන්න මෙතන එනවා නේද 50 calculated one understood 450 calculated value right deducted from distribution expenses දැන් හිතන්න මෙතන තියෙනවා distribution මේව නිකන් 1000 කියලා හිතන්නකෝ මෙහෙම promotion තියෙනවා 100 bad debt 20 කියලා හොඳනේ ඒතර doubtful debt expense එක අඩු කරලා ගන්න 23 එක අඩු කරනවා එහෙම අඩු කරලා 97 එනවනේ අන්න ඒක තමයි එතකොට අර total distribution expenses වලින් තමයි අඩු කරලා ගන්න right understood